boardroom, my pulse pounding like a war drum against my ribs. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, as the stench of betrayal filled the room. My brother, Lucas, leaned back in his chair, a smirk plastered across his arrogant face, his expensive suit crisp as if he hadn't just stabbed me in the back moments ago. "That's cute, Elena," he said, voice laced with condescension. "But let's be real here. You were never meant to run this company. You're just a pretty face. You don't belong in a boardroom. You should be grateful I'm taking this burden off your hands." My hands curled into fists at my sides. The company wasn't just some burden. It was my legacy, the empire my father had built from the ground up, the empire I had sacrificed years of my life to nurture. But Lucas, the golden boy, the favorite son, had manipulated his way into stealing it from me. I forced myself to breathe, to keep the fire in my chest from consuming me whole. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. "You think you can just take everything from me?" I said, my voice steady despite the rage boiling beneath my skin. "Do you really think this is over?" Lucas chuckled, shaking his head like I was nothing more than an amusing child throwing a tantrum. His lackeys, board members he had bought and manipulated, laughed along with him, mocking me, dismissing me, underestimating me. And then he said the words that burned themselves into my soul, the words that would fuel the storm inside me. "You have no power here, Elena. You never did." The room exploded with laughter. I stood there, surrounded by men in suits, men who had turned their backs on me, who had chosen him over the one person who had fought for this company's survival. I had been cast aside, humiliated, but they had no idea what they had just awakened. I walked out of that boardroom with my head held high, but inside I was a hurricane waiting to strike. As soon as I stepped into the hallway, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out, barely glancing at the caller ID before answering. It was Daniel, my father's closest confidant, one of the few people I still trusted. "Elena," he said, his voice sharp, urgent. "I just heard what happened." I exhaled, gripping the phone tighter. "It's worse than you think." He has the board in his pocket. They signed everything over to him. A pause. And then, not everything. I stopped walking. My heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" There was a smirk in his voice when he replied, a knowing smirk that sent a thrill of something dangerous down my spine. "You'll see." Before I could ask more, he hung up. I stared at my phone for a long moment. Then, slowly, a smile stretched across my lips. Lucas thought he had won. He had no idea that his downfall had already begun. I didn't leave the office. Not yet. Lucas and his cronies were still celebrating in that boardroom, laughing over their stolen victory, but I wasn't done here. I walked with purpose, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floors, my mind racing. Daniel had given me a glimmer of hope. Not everything had been taken from me. But what? I pushed open the doors to my office, my former office, as Lucas would soon declare, and found Daniel already there, seated casually in the chair across from my desk. He looked up, his face unreadable. Then, in one smooth motion, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. He slid it across the desk. I snatched it up and flipped it open. My eyes scanned the documents, my breath hitching as I realized what I was looking at. The real financials. My pulse skyrocketed. This doesn't match what was presented to the board today, I whispered, flipping through the pages. "No, it doesn't," Daniel said coolly. "That's because Lucas lied." A cold rage settled in my stomach as the truth began to unfold. Lucas had faked the numbers, inflated projections, buried debts, hidden losses. He had painted a false picture of success to the board while simultaneously using legal loopholes to cut you out of the equation. I slammed the folder shut. "We need to bring this to the board. If they see..." "They won't care," Daniel interrupted, his voice hard. "Lucas has them in his pocket. You show them this, they'll find a way to dismiss it. They've already chosen their king." I exhaled sharply. He was right. But that didn't mean I was out of moves. "You still own something they don't," Daniel continued. "And that's why Lucas is terrified of you." I looked at him. "What do I own?" Daniel's lips curled into the faintest smirk. The land this company sits on. My heart stopped. I spent the next 12 hours strategizing. If Lucas thought he could erase me, he was about to get a rude awakening. By the time the next morning rolled around, the news had already broken. Lucas's fraudulent financials? Leaked. Anonymous sources? Me. The reports exposed him, casting a shadow of doubt over his leadership. The headlines painted him as reckless, dishonest, untrustworthy. Investors started pulling back, questioning their stake in the company. Panic was setting in. And then, just when Lucas was scrambling to do damage control, the final blow landed. The land. The company's headquarters, the very building where Lucas sat in his stolen throne, belonged to me. My father had left it in my name years ago, knowing real power wasn't in ownership of shares, but in controlling the foundation. And I had just terminated the lease. The moment the official legal notice was delivered, I knew the second it reached Lucas. Because not even 30 seconds later, my phone rang. I took my time answering. Elena. Lucas's voice was tight with rage. What the hell do you think you're doing? I leaned back in my chair, savoring the shift in power. He wasn't laughing now. You said I had no power, I said lightly. Seems like I do. This is a goddamn joke. No, Lucas. The joke was thinking you could steal from me and get away with it. Silence. I could hear his shallow breathing, the way his mind was racing for a way out of this. You'll regret this, he finally spat. I smiled. I'm counting on it. And then I hung up. Game on. I knew Lucas wouldn't take this lying down. He was ruthless, but so was I, except I still had something he never would, a conscience. I wasn't trying to destroy him for sport. I just wanted back what was rightfully mine. But if he wanted war, I wouldn't back down. The morning after I pulled the rug out from under him, the company was in chaos. Investors were panicking, employees were whispering, and the press was circling like vultures. Lucas had no choice but to face me. And sure enough, he did. I was sitting in a quiet cafe across from my lawyer, going over our next steps, when the door slammed open. Lucas stormed in. People turned to look. He didn't care. He made a beeline for my table, his face twisted in fury. What the hell do you think you're doing? He hissed, slamming his hands onto the table. I didn't even flinch. I just set my coffee down and looked at him calmly. Having breakfast. You? His jaw tightened. Don't play games with me, Elena. You think you can just evict the company? What are you trying to prove? I sighed, finally looking at him. Really looking at him. For the first time, I noticed the exhaustion under his eyes, the slight tremor in his fingers. He wasn't invincible. Lucas, I said, my voice softer than even I expected. I'm not trying to destroy you. I'm trying to make things right. His mouth pressed into a thin line. He wasn't ready to hear that. I built that company, he said, his voice shaking with anger. I deserve to run it. I leaned forward. You built it on lies. He flinched. I saw the flicker of doubt, the briefest moment where he knew I was right. But Lucas was too proud, too deep in his own mess to admit it. You won't win, he said, but there was less fire in his voice now. More desperation. I took a deep breath. I could have thrown more fuel on the fire. I could have taunted him, told him how everything was slipping through his fingers. But I didn't. Because I wasn't him. Instead, I said, then fight for it the right way. Be better. He stared at me, something unreadable in his expression. And then, without another word, he turned and left. For the first time, I saw fear in his step. Because he knew I wasn't just fighting to take back what was mine. I was fighting to expose the truth. And deep down, he knew he was on the wrong side of it. Later that night, I was reviewing my next move when Daniel called. We have a problem, he said without preamble. I sighed. What now? He hesitated. You have an offer. I frowned. An offer? From the new board chair. My heart stopped. Daniel let out a low chuckle. Elena, you might want to sit down for this. And that was when everything changed. I sat in my office, Daniel's words replaying in my head like a broken record. The new board chair wants to meet with you. This was unexpected. Lucas had gone to great lengths to stack the board with people loyal to him. But after the financial scandal, the company had no choice but to bring in a new chair, someone independent, powerful, and untouchable. And now that person wanted to talk to me. I exhaled, gripping my phone. Did they say why? Daniel chuckled. If I had to guess, they smell blood in the water. And they're wondering if you're the shark. That was all I needed to hear. I texted back one word. When? The meeting was set for the next morning in a high-rise downtown. I arrived early, wanting to get a read on the situation before walking into the lion's den. But the moment the doors to the boardroom opened, I froze. Because sitting at the head of the table wasn't a stranger. It was Adrian Blackwell. My stomach dropped. I hadn't seen him in years, but I'd recognize him anywhere. The self-made billionaire, the corporate strategist who turned failing companies into gold mines, the man who once meant everything to me. And judging by the slight smirk on his face, he knew exactly what he was doing. Elena, Adrian said smoothly, standing and extending a hand. It's been a while. I ignored his hand. You're the new board chair? He chuckled, unbothered by my cold reaction. Surprised? That didn't even begin to cover it. I swallowed down the 1,000 questions racing through my mind and took a seat across from him. Why am I here? Adrian leaned forward, his piercing eyes locking onto mine. Because, Elena, I'm about to offer you something Lucas never will. I folded my arms, keeping my expression unreadable. I'm listening. Adrian tapped his fingers on the polished mahogany table. Lucas has lost the board's confidence. They're looking for a way out, a leader who can stabilize the company before it collapses. I raised an eyebrow. And you think that's me? He tilted his head slightly. I know it is. A million emotions swirled inside me, but I refused to let them show. Why would you back me? Adrian's smirk faded, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something genuine in his gaze. Because I know what you're capable of. And because Lucas isn't just a bad leader, he's a liability. If we don't move fast, there won't be a company left to fight for. His voice was steady, but I caught the undertone of urgency. He wasn't lying. I let out a slow breath. What do you want in return? Adrian leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Loyalty. I narrowed my eyes. To you? To the company, he corrected. To fixing what Lucas broke. You and I both know this isn't about revenge anymore. This is about restoring what your father built. A lump formed in my throat at the mention of my father. Adrian knew exactly which strings to pull. I clenched my fists under the table, forcing myself to think clearly. I didn't trust easily, especially not Adrian Blackwell. But this wasn't about trust. This was about winning. I met his gaze head-on. I'll do it. Adrian smiled, slow and knowing. Then let's bring Lucas to his knees. It didn't take long for Lucas to find out. By the time I left the meeting, my phone was already blowing up. I let it ring, let him stew in his own impending downfall for a while before finally answering. Elena, he seethed. I swear to God. Save it, Lucas. I interrupted, my voice calm. You had your chance to do this right. You chose to lie, manipulate, and steal. I could practically hear his teeth grinding. You think you can take this from me? I let a slow smile spread across my lips. I already have. Silence. Then, the line went dead. I stared at my phone for a long moment. Lucas wasn't the type to go down without a fight. And I had a feeling his next move would be his most dangerous yet. Lucas didn't call again. That alone made me uneasy. I knew my brother. When he was furious and desperate, he wasn't the type to sit back and take a loss. He was plotting something, and I needed to figure out what before he made his next move. I sat in my office, the weight of the battle pressing down on me, when Daniel knocked and stepped inside, his expression unusually grim. We have a problem, he said. I sighed. What now? Daniel slid a folder across the desk. Lucas isn't just fighting back, he's going for blood. I flipped it open and immediately felt my stomach turn. A lawsuit. Lucas was suing me for breach of contract, defamation, and unlawful interference in company affairs. I let out a bitter laugh. He's really this desperate? Daniel sat down across from me. It's not just legal posturing, Elena. He's taking this to the media. He's claiming you've been sabotaging the company out of spite, that you're unstable, and he hesitated. I narrowed my eyes. And what? Daniel clenched his jaw. And that you weren't your father's real choice to run the company. My breath hitched. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. He wouldn't dare. But of course he would. Lucas was rewriting history, twisting my father's legacy to paint himself as the victim and me as some bitter, spoiled daughter out for revenge. And the worst part? Some people would believe him. I exhaled slowly, gripping the edge of my desk. We need to hit back. Hard. Daniel nodded. Already on it. But, Elena, he hesitated again, looking at me carefully. Are you ready for what's coming next? I met his gaze, steel in my voice. I don't have a choice, do I? Because Lucas wasn't just trying to win anymore. He was trying to destroy me. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The legal battle? The PR war? That was expected. But Lucas had never been patient. He had something else planned, something I hadn't seen yet. I was lost in thought when my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Unknown number. For a second, I hesitated. But then, curiosity won. I answered. Hello. A familiar voice sent a chill down my spine. Elena. My heart skipped a beat. It was Adrian. I need to see you, he said, his voice lower, more serious than before. Now. I frowned. What's wrong? A pause. Then, Lucas isn't just after you, Elena. He's after everything. And I don't think you realize how far he's willing to go. My stomach twisted. I had been so focused on the board, the company, the legal battle, I hadn't stopped to ask the most important question. What was Lucas really planning? And judging by the urgency in Adrian's voice, I was about to find out. I met Adrian at a private lounge, away from prying eyes. The second I walked in, I could tell something was seriously wrong. He looked tense. Adrian Blackwell was always in control, always calm and collected. But tonight? His jaw was clenched, and his hands were folded tightly on the table, like he was barely holding something back. I sat down. Talk. He didn't waste time. I have sources inside Lucas's camp, he said, leaning forward. They tell me he's not just fighting for the company anymore. I swallowed hard. Then what is he fighting for? Adrian exhaled. Survival. I stared at him. What? Adrian's gaze locked onto mine. Elena, Lucas isn't just lying to the board, he's in deep trouble. He made deals he shouldn't have. He's in debt to the wrong people, and if he loses this company, he loses everything. My blood ran cold. I had thought this was just about power, about control. But for Lucas, this was about survival. And that meant he was desperate. Desperate people did dangerous things. I forced myself to stay calm. What kind of deals? Adrian's lips pressed together. The kind that don't end with lawsuits, Elena. The kind that end with people disappearing. My heart started pounding. Are you saying? I'm saying you need to be careful, Adrian interrupted, his voice deadly serious. Because if Lucas thinks you're about to take everything from him, he won't just fight you in court. He'll come after you for real. A chill ran down my spine. Lucas and I had fought before. But this wasn't a corporate war anymore. This was something much, much darker. I barely made it home before everything went to hell. I had just stepped inside my apartment when I noticed something was wrong. The lights were already on. My breath hitched. I hadn't left them on. I slowly reached into my bag, my fingers closing around my phone. My pulse was racing as I stepped further inside, every nerve in my body on high alert. And then a shadow moved. Before I could react, a figure lunged out from the darkness. I barely had time to twist away before a hand grabbed my wrist, hard. Adrenaline surged through me. I struggled, twisting sharply, and managed to break free just enough to see his face. One of Lucas's enforcers. A bruiser. The kind of guy who didn't ask questions, just followed orders. My stomach dropped. Lucas really had crossed the line. He wasn't trying to win anymore. He was trying to silence me. My instincts kicked in. Fast. I twisted out of the man's grip, adrenaline flooding my veins. He lunged again, but I slammed my elbow into his ribs, hard. He grunted, staggering back for a split second I used to run. I darted toward the kitchen, my mind racing. Weapons. I needed something. The bruiser recovered quickly. Too quickly. I grabbed the first thing I saw, a heavy glass vase, and swung it with everything I had. It shattered against his shoulder, but he barely flinched. Too big. Too strong. He reached for me again. A sudden blaring siren filled the apartment. My security alarm. His eyes widened in panic.
He knew he was out of time.
With one last, furious glare, he bolted for the window. By the time I reached the door, he was gone. But I wasn't stupid. This wasn't over. I didn't hesitate. The second he was gone, I grabbed my phone and dialed. Adrian answered on the first ring. Elena? Lucas just sent someone to my apartment. My voice was shaking, but not from fear. From rage. Silence. Then, are you hurt?
No.
But I'm done playing defense. I heard Adrian exhale.
Good.
Because it's time we end this. By morning, Lucas's game was over. The media was everywhere. The leaked financials? Front page. The lawsuit? Public embarrassment. And now, the security footage of a masked intruder breaking into my home? That was the final nail in his coffin. Lucas tried to spin it. Tried to deny it. But the evidence was undeniable. He was finished. And by the time the board called an emergency meeting, I was ready. I walked into the boardroom with Adrian at my side. Lucas was already there, his face pale, his confidence shattered. He knew what was coming. I took my seat.
Calm.
Controlled. The board chair looked at me, then at Lucas. Mr. Carter, after reviewing the evidence, we have come to a decision. A beat of silence. And then, you are hereby removed as CEO, effective immediately. Lucas's face twisted in fury. You can't do this. The chair didn't even blink. Actually, we can. And then she turned to me. Elena, the board has voted unanimously. We want you to take his place. I exhaled, my heart hammering. Lucas scoffed. You think she can handle this? She's nothing but. I turned to face him, cutting him off with a look. Lucas, I said, my voice steady. Get out. For the first time in his life, he had no power. And he knew it. Without another word, he shoved his chair back and stormed out. The moment the door slammed behind him, the weight of everything hit me. I had won. I had taken back what was mine. But at what cost? A week later, I sat in my new office. My father's office. Everything should have felt perfect. But it didn't. Because despite everything, Lucas was still my brother. And I knew he wasn't going to disappear. Thinking too hard. I looked up to see Adrian leaning against the doorframe. I sighed. Just wondering when Lucas will make his next move. Adrian smirked. Let him try. I shook my head. I don't want revenge anymore, Adrian. I just want peace. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. Then let's make sure you keep it. I smiled. For the first time in years, I felt like I could finally breathe. Lucas was gone. The company was